Hello, welcome back. So, a few housekeeping things. The Circling Institute is now doing all of their offerings online. So, if you've been interested in partaking in circling, there won't be the distance barrier anymore, and that's been working out really, really well. I had my doubts. However, I found it to be pretty profoundly effective, and even more effective in some cases in doing circling. So I'm pretty excited about this. And so I hope to see some of you, and all the information is below the Circling Institute website, and also the Facebook pages where you can see all of our events. If you want to do one-on-one work with me, my email is below. Just go ahead and email me and let me know. And I think that's it. So this is, I believe, episode 5 of this series of Chris and I reading the Platonic Dialogues. And I played Socrates this one. And I just want to say in advance, you get to watch Guy struggle through all of the Greek names of people. I think I'm going to be speaking with a limp for the next week after that whole experience. But we did a lot of reading in the front end of it, and we started to really dialogue about it. I think somewhere around midway through. So there's also a link below to the translation that we're reading from, and you can download that from Scribe for free. And I'll put the page number that we started at, so you can. I definitely would recommend reading along if you can. And I'm excited. I'm really glad that I'm doing this with Chris. He's such a beautiful being, and the way that he so naturally weaves cosmos with his language is, I'm learning a lot through this, and just really appreciate our flow. And also watching how many different dimensions of intelligibility the Socratic dialogues are. And we just started the first one. We're not even probably halfway through it. And I'm just like, whoa, so much here. So it's a journey. Thanks for joining us. Much love. Now.
All right. So why don't you start with that line then, and take it away whenever you like.
Okay, so we're on. This is page 574. If you're new to this, just I'll put a link down to where you can get the copy that we're reading from on PDF for free. And I'll be Socrates.
And I shall be Alcibiades.
You got it.
All right.
So you don't waver about what you don't know, if in fact you know that you don't know.
Apparently not.
Don't you realize that the error in our conduct are caused by the kind of ignorance of thinking that we know when we don't know?
What do you mean by that?
Well, we don't set out to do something unless we think we know we're doing right.
Right.
But when people don't think they know how to do something, they hand it over to somebody else, right?
Of course.
So the sort of people who don't think they know how to do things makes no difference in life, because they leave those things to other people.
You're right.
Well, who are the ones making this mistake? Surely not the ones who know.
Of course not.
Well, since it's not those who know, and it's not those who don't know, and know they don't know, is there anyone left except those who don't know but think they do know?
No, they're the only ones left.
So this is the ignorance that causes bad things. This is the most disgraceful sort of stupidity.
Yes.
And isn't it most harmful and most contemptible when it is ignorance of the most important things?
Very much so.
Well, can you name anything more important than what's just and admirable and good and advantageous?
No, I really can't.
But aren't those the things you say you're wavering about?
Yes.
So if you're wavering, it's obvious from what we've said that not only are you ignorant about the most important things, but you also think you know what you don't know.
I guess that's right.
Good God, Alcibiades, what sort of state you're in? I hesitate to call it by name, but still, since we're alone, it must be said, you are wedded to stupidity, my good fellow. Stupidity is the highest degree of our discussions, and your own words convince you of it. This is why you're rushing into politics before you've got an education. You're not alone. You're not alone. Okay, I have a weird. You're not alone in this state, this sad state. You've got most of our city's politicians for company. There are there are only a few exceptions. Among them, perhaps your guardian, Perseus.
Yes, Socrates, and people do say that he didn't acquire his expertise all by himself. He kept company with many experts, like Pythagoras and Anaxagoras. Even now, despite his advanced age, he consults with Damon for the same purpose.
Really? Have you ever seen any expert who is unable to make others expert in what he knows? The person who taught you how to read and write, he had expertise in his field, and he made you and anybody else he liked expert as well, didn't he?
Yes.
And will you, having learned from him, be able to teach somebody?
Yes.
And isn't it the same with the music teacher and the gymnastics teacher?
Certainly.
I think we can be pretty sure that someone understands something when he can show that he has made someone else understand it.
We were just talking about this, weren't we, before we started recording?
Yeah.
You and I, right?
Yeah.
About that right, the relationship between the teacher and their own pedagogy.
Right.
That's a nice little coincidence there.
Yeah, that is really nice.
I'm sorry. I'll try not to do that. What did I just? Sir, I agree.
Well then, can you tell me who Perseus, is that how you pronounce it?
I think it's Pericles.
Pericles, okay. Well then, can you tell me who Pericles has made into an expert? Shall we start with his son?
But Socrates, both of his sons turned out to be idiots.
What about, and how do you say that one?
I think it's Clinias.
Clinias. What about Clinias, your brother?
There's no point talking about him. He's a madman.
Well then, since Clinias is a madman and Pericles' sons were idiots, why shall we say in the reason that he allowed you to be in the state you're in?
I suppose it's because I didn't really pay attention.
But can you name any other Athenian or foreigner, slave or free, who became any more of an expert by keeping company with Pericles? After all, I can name Pythagoras, son of Ischolus. How do you say that one?
I think it's Isolicus.
Isolicus, and Cialus, son of Calades, who became wise through their association with Zeno. They paid him 100 mines each and became famous experts.
I can't think of anyone. By Zeus.
Very well. what do you propose for yourself? Do you intend to remain in your present condition or practice some self-cultivation?
Let's discuss it together, Socrates. I do see what you're saying, and I actually agree. Actually, I agree. It seems to me that none of our city's politicians has been properly educated, except for a few.
And what does that mean?
Well, if they were educated, then anyone who wanted to compete with them would have had to get some knowledge and go into training, like an athlete. But as it is, since they entered politics as amateurs, there's no need for me to train and go to the trouble of learning. I'm sure my natural abilities will be far superior to theirs.
Good God, my dear boy, what a thing to say. How unworthy of your good looks and your other advantages.
What in the world do you mean, Socrates? What are you getting at?
I'm furious with you and my infatuation for you.
Why?
Because you stoop to compete with these people.
Who else have I got to compete with?
That's a fine sort of question from a man who thinks he holds himself in high esteem.
What do you mean? Aren't they my competitors?
Look here. If you were intending to steer a ship into battle, would you be content to be the best sailor at steering? Granted, that's necessary. But wouldn't you keep your eye on the real opponents and not on your comrades, as you're doing now? Surely you ought to be so far superior to them that they're happy to be your humble comrades in the struggle and wouldn't dream of competing with you. I'm assuming that you do really intend to distinguish yourself with some splendid deed worthy of you and your city.
Yes, that's certainly what I intend to do.
Dear me, how very poor it is for you to be satisfied with being better than the soldiers. How proper not to keep an eye on the leaders of the opposing camp, so that you can someday become better than them by training and scheming against them.
Who are you talking about, Socrates?
Don't you know that our city is at war from time to time with the Spartans and the great king of Persia?
You're right.
So since you plan to be leader of the city, and wouldn't it be right to think that your struggle is with the king of Sparta or Persia?
That may all well be true.
Okay, so right now it sounds to me he's revealing his folly big time. I mean, he's been just kind of deconstructing him through this whole thing. Now he's revealing that he doesn't know where to aim for the enemy, or who the enemy is. So this is where it starts to get into this wisdom. It's a question of wisdom, it seems.
Yeah, and the right level of resolution to direct his sense of organization as well, right? Like when he says, you were intending to steer a ship into battle, would you be content to be the best sailor at steering, right?
Right.
And right, would you interpose yourself into the role of the one sailor steering, or would you, or now maybe I'm interpolating this, but it can't help but remind me a little bit of the Phaedrus, the chariot myth of the Phaedrus, right? That it involves a greater sense of coherence and organization that directs and orients attention where it ought to be, right? It's not just the one role, the one position. You have to pick the right level of resolution for the organization, right? It's not just the one horse, it's the coherence of all the horses, right? It's not just the one sailor, it's the cooperative organization of the sailors that aims attention to the right opponent. Right. You know who your comrades are and know who your enemy is, right? Direct your attention in such a way that you can gather yourself around the optimal organization that you need in order to be rational, right? Because that's what the sense of rationality is, right? It's the cohering at the right level of resolution. Look at the right things. Pay attention to the right things.
Right. And so Alcibiades he's not only not paying attention to the right things, but he doesn't know that he's not even looking to pay attention to the right thing, that he's
Right.
not even not looking, right?
Right.
So something else is going on. So it just seems like Socrates keeps unpinning every pin of certainty he has about knowing, including who's talking in the conversation.
Right.
Right.
Right. And I had this inkling that he's trying to evoke his appetite for opponent, his opponent appetites, but to redirect his opponent appetites into the right opponent process. I can use that term, right?
Yeah. Okay, great. But what sort of notion is that? Am I in the right place? Let's see.
Did you do that larger chunk from Socrates already? After that may all well be true.
How about I start up with? Okay, yeah, okay. Let me just do that part. We'll start from there. No, sir. You've got to keep an eye on Midius, the cockfighter, and such people. People who try to run the city's affairs with their slave boy hairstyles, as the women say, still showing on their boorish minds.
I think that's my new favorite line.
They set out to flatter the city with their outlandish talk, not to rule it. These are the people, I'm telling you, you've got to keep your eyes on. So, relax. Don't bother to learn what needs to be learned for the great struggle to come. Don't train yourself for what needs training. Go ahead and go into politics with your complete and thorough preparation.
No, Socrates, I think you're right. But I still don't think the Spartan generals or the Persian king are any different from anyone else.
But what sort of notion is that? Think about it.
About what?
In the first place, when do you think you'd cultivate yourself? If you feared them and thought they were formidable, or if you didn't?
Obviously, if I thought they were formidable.
Surely, you don't think that cultivating yourself will do any harm, do you?
Not at all. In fact, it would be a big help.
So that's one flaw in this notion of yours, a big flaw, isn't it?
You're right.
Now, the second flaw is that it's also false, judging by the probabilities.
What do you mean?
Is it like the natural talents will be great among noble families or in other families?
In noble families, obviously.
Those who are well born will turn out to be perfectly virtuous if they're well brought up, won't they?
They certainly will.
So let's compare our situation with theirs and consider, first of all, whether the Spartan and Persian kings are of humbler descent. We know, of course, that the Spartan kings are descended from Hercules, and the Persian kings are descended from Achaemenes, and that the families of Hercules and Achaemenes go right back to Perseus, son of Zeus.
Mine too, Socrates. My family goes back to, let's give this a try, Eurysaces? Mm-hmm. Let's go with that. And Eurysaces goes back to Zeus.
So does mine too. So does mine too. Alcibiades, mine goes back to these Greek words. It makes me do stuff with my tongue that I can't do.
I'd say take your time. Okay. I have a tendency to want to rush through them, and that's, I think, the wrong instinct. So really take your time. You've got it.
You got it. So does mine too, noble Alcibiades. Mine goes back to Daedalus And Daedalus goes back to Hephaestus,
I
son
think
of
it's
Zeus.
Hephaestus, I think. Hephaestus.
Hephaestus, son of Zeus. Starting with those kings, though, and tracing backwards, every one of them is a king, all the way back to Zeus. Kings of Argos and Sparta, and kings of Persia and in eternity, and sometimes of Asia, too, as they are now. But you and I are private citizens, as were our fathers. And if you had to show off your ancestors of Salamis, the native land of Eurysakes, to Artaxerxes. Okay.
I think it's Artaxerxes.
Artaxerxes, son of
Xerxes.
Xerxes, or Aegina, the native land of oh my God, native land of Acus, the ancestors of I'm like wrestling in my mouth and with my tongue. Ancestors of your sauces. Don't you realize your sauces? How do you say that one? Ancestors of your sauce.
I think I said before. I think it's either Eurysakes or Eurysakes.
Okay.
Or Eurysakes.
Eurysakes.
It's a multiple choice. Choose
Yes.
from the above.
Whichever one I could say, that's the one it is. Eurysakes. Don't you realize?
My phonetic ancient Greece needs some work. Maybe we'll devote one of these videos to just to ancient Greek phonetics. That'd be fun.
Absolutely. Don't you? I'll speak with a limp for about a week after the intro.
Speak with a limp. I like that.
Don't you realize how much you'd be laughed at? But you think we're the equal of those men in the dignity of our descent, as well as in our upbringing. Haven't you noticed what a commanding position the Spartan kings enjoy? Their wives are guarded at public expense by the ephors, so as to ensure, as far as possible, that their kings are descended from the family of Heraclides alone. And as the Persian king, his position is so supreme that nobody so much as suspects his heir of being fathered by anybody but him. That's why his queen is left unguarded except by fear. With the eldest son and heir to the throne is born, all kings subject have a feast day. Then, in the years that follow, the whole of Asia celebrates that day, the king's birthday, with further sacrifice and feast. But when we are born, Alcibiades, even the neighbors hardly notice it, as the cosmic poet says. Then the boy is brought up. Did you want to say something there?
No. I'm just saying.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Then the boy is brought up, not by some nanny of no account, but by the most highly respected eunuchs in the royal household. What's a eunuch? Do you know?
Well, I don't know if that means eunuch in the typical and perhaps pejorative sense of the term. Let's come back to that. I'm not sure if they mean the eunuch in the sense that we know the term to be.
Right.
We'll circle back. Perhaps
he sounds like a nanny or something, maybe. By the most highly respected eunuchs, well, maybe not, in the royal household. They attend to all the needs of the infant child and are especially concerned to make him as handsome as possible, shaping and straightening his infant limbs, and for this they are held up in great esteem. When the boys reach 7 years of age, they take up horseback, riding in with the instructors, and begin to hunt wild game. When he is twice 7 years, the boy is entrusted to people called the royal tutors. These are 4 Persians of mature age who have been selected as the best, the wisest, the justest, and most self-controlled, and the bravest. The first of them instructs him in the worship of their gods, the Magian lore of Zoroaster, son of Horomazes, and also in what the king should know. The justest man teaches him to be truthful his whole life long. The most self-controlled man teaches him not to be mastered by even a single pleasure, so that he can get accustomed to being a free man and a real king, whose first duty is to rule himself, not to be a slave of himself. The bravest man trains him to be fearless and undaunted, because fear is slavery. That's intense. But for you, Alcibiades, Persicles chose from among his household Zophrus, I
think it's Thracian.
Thracian, a tutor so old he was perfectly useless. I could tell you about all the rest of the upbringing and education of your competitors, but it would be a long story. And besides, you could probably imagine the later stages from what I've told you so far. But, Alcibiades, your birth, your upbringing, and your education, or that of any other Athenian, is of no concern to anybody, to tell the truth. Nobody. That is, except perhaps some man who may happen to be in love with you. Again, if you care to consider the wealth of the Persians, the splendor, the clothes, and the trailing robes, the anointings with myrrh, the throng of servants in waiting, and all their other luxuries, you'd be ashamed of your circumstances, because you'd see how inferior they are to theirs. Again, if you care to consider the self-control and the decorum of the Spartans, their confidence and their composure, their self-esteem and their discipline, their courage and their fortitude, and their love of hardship, victory, and honor, you'd consider yourself a mere child in all these respects. Again, we'd better discuss your wealth, Alcibiades. If you're to see where you stand, you may devote yourself to it and think it makes you something. But if you care to look at the wealth of the Spartans, you'd realize that it greatly exceeds ours in Athens. They have land of their own, and in the Mesene, that not a single one of our estates could compete with, not in size, nor in quality, nor in slaves, especially helots, nor even in horses, nor in other livestock grazing in Messene. But I'll pass over all that. Yeah, you should try to read it, Socrates. You try to pass over that. There is more gold and silver in Sparta in private hands than the rest of Greece put together. It's been coming into them for many generations, pouring in from all of Greece's cities and often from foreign cities too, and it never goes out again. It's just like what the fox say to the lion in Aesop's fable. You can clearly see the tracks of the money going in towards Sparta, but the tracks coming out are nowhere to be seen. You can be sure that the Spartans are the richest of the Greeks in gold and silver, and that the king is the richest of all the Spartans, because the greatest share of these revenues goes to him. Furthermore, he receives a considerable sum from the Spartans by way of royal tribute. But great as they are when compared to other Greek cities, the Spartans' fortunes are nothing comparable with the fortunes of the Persians and their king. I once spoke with a reliable man who traveled over to the Persian court, and he told me that he crossed a very large and rich tract of land, nearly a day's journey across, which the locals call the Queen Girdle. There's another one called the Queen's Veil, as well as many others, all fine and rich properties, each one named for a part of the Queen's wardrobe, because each one is set aside to pay for the Queen's finery. Now, suppose someone were to say to Amistris, the king's mother and the widow of Xerxes, quote, the son of Demachi, instead to challenge your son. Her wardrobe is worth only 50 minas at best, and her son has less than 300 acres of land at Ircha. I think she'd be wondering what this Alcibiades had up his sleeve to think of competing against Artaxerxes. I think she'd say, I don't see what his fellow could be relying on, except diligence and wisdom. The Greeks don't have anything else worth mentioning. But if she heard that this Alcibiades, who is making his attempt, is in the first place hardly 20 years old, and secondly, entirely uneducated, and furthermore, when his lover tells him to study and cultivate himself and discipline himself so that he can compete with the king, he says he doesn't want to and that he's happy with the way he is. If she heard all that, I think she'd ask in amazement, what in the world could this youngster be relying on? Suppose we were to reply, good looks, height, birth, wealth, and native intelligence. Then Alcibiades, considering all that they have of these things as well, she'd conclude that we were stark raving mad. Again, I think that Lampedo, the daughter of Leoclides, wife of Archidamus, Archidamus, and mother of Agis, who were all Spartan kings, would be similarly amazed if you, with your bad upbringing, proposed to compete with her son, considering all his advantages. And yet, don't you think it's disgraceful that even our enemies' wives have a better appreciation than we do of what it would take to challenge them? No, my excellent friend, trust in me and in the Delphic inscription and, quote, know thyself, unquote. These are the people we must defeat, not the ones you think, and we have no hope of defeating them unless we act with both diligence and skill. If you fall short in these, then you will fall short of achieving fame in Greece as well as abroad. And that is what I think you're longing for, more than anyone else ever longed for anything.
Way to go, Guy. Go ahead and take a sip of water.
Yeah, no doubt. No doubt. So what are you getting so far with this?
It's like the longest it's a pretty elaborate wake-up call.
Yeah.
But a wake-up call it is. Wake-up call it is, you know?
Right.
I mean, there's a lot in there, but among them is the the proffered revelation that if you're going to rest upon these laurels, if you're going to seek refuge in all that you have, you may as well draw yourself in comparison to the highest order of magnitude that exists within that mode, right?
Yeah.
To its greatest scale.
Yeah.
And I mean, it's humiliating in the proper sense of the term, humiliating.
Yeah.
Right.
Totally.
Right.
Totally.
If this is your ambition, then your ambition must be humiliated by us exploring the ultimate scale in which that particular mode of appetite would be relevant.
Yeah.
And once we elevate it to that scale, the mode of appetite all of a sudden becomes revealed for its proper nature.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
And it's so interesting to be Alcibiades listening to this.
Imagine. Yeah.
Right. It's for him to attend in that way or to see it in that way, he must be someone different than who he is.
Yeah. Well, he's riding the view from above, right? As it zooms higher and higher, as he's retreated, he's borne away from himself further and further and further away.
Right.
To this continental view.
Yeah.
Of right. This like that his provisions are.
Yes.
He's been revealed in his scarcity.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
His true scarcity, right? His abundance, his relative abundance has revealed to be tremendously scarce. And if that becomes your way of grounding out your identity and it's revealed to be so scarce, then what do you have left? You've been suddenly dispossessed of the very things that constitute you and your knowing and your excellence. What excellence have you left to wield if it was predicated on something that was so very contingent? So very contingent on a level of resolution that Socrates has just deprived him of.
Right.
Yeah. Let's zoom out. Let's compare you now to the Spartans. Let's compare you now to the Persians.
Right.
Wow. Then you're really a whole lot of nothing, my friend.
Uh-huh. So it's interesting because it's like I think if you look at this as if we zoom out and look at what's happening in the dialogue, right? And what is the dialogue doing? It's like it's shifting and it's doing something, right? So there's like what Socrates is literally saying, right? And what Alcibiades is saying and back and forth. But what is that showing us, right? And I think it's like somehow Socrates is the finger that's pointing to, it's not just that he hasn't understood those things. He's somehow getting him to see, from a different vantage point. So he's taking him somewhere, right?
He's understood them, but he hasn't appreciated them.
Yeah. And no, so how is appreciation starting to dawn on him? Like, what is Socrates doing? So it's like one thing, he's zooming out, right?
It's a peripatetic, right? Socrates is actually taking him. Like Socrates could have very easily said to him, listen, your comparative abundance, your comparative wealth, your comparative handsomeness is really quite minuscule if we were to compare it to those who have it in such greater quantity and in such greater volume. He could have just said that. I mean, there's more than that going on in this monologue, but he could have said that in a much pithier way. But instead, what he did is he very, very slowly, very gradually, and in a graduating fashion, took him on a journey.
That's it.
And he made him live his scarcity, right?
Right.
He made him live it, and he made us live it. Right. That's the difference. And that's the difference between the understanding in the shallow sense of the term and the appreciation in the right is that the appreciation is lived. Yeah. And Socrates forces him to live it. And forces
exactly. So in
forced
the dialogue,
and forced poor guy Sengstock to live it.
Yeah, totally. Well,
right?
Well, it's also, I think that just in dialogue, this is what's possible, right? That this is like where and kind of bringing back in this thing that John's been really, and I've been realizing along with him about, in the psychotechnologies, in our practices, we've that it may be necessary, right, for us to engage in philosophia, right, in sacred dialogue. That it's not like something that it'd be nice if it was there, right? It may be something that's that is necessary, like that our practices, that engaging in this kind of dialogue, that make these kinds of shifts in one's identity and perspective, is something that's actually necessary, and not optional for us. Mm-hmm. So I'm just kind of thinking about that, just kind of bringing myself along as we're reading this, because I also know that Gonzalez talks about this of where, there's all these, as we talked before, there's all these different ways to read Plato, right? There's been just historically all these different fights and viewpoints about, like, what was Plato trying to do? Was he trying to do anything? Is there a system underneath it? Is it just art? There's all these different views. And Gonzalez was kind of honing in on that. The first number of dialogues were basically like Plato trying to see if he could wake people up to the philosophic life, right? Like, how do you get somebody who doesn't see, and they don't see that they don't see, to see, right? That to do what it took to live a philosophical life, they could actually see it, first of all, to then be attracted to it or choose it or not, right? And so there's a strange thing that goes on there, because what it takes on some level is, in order to see it, that presupposes the transformation that it takes to see it, right? Because if this is the philosophical life, we'll say, right, this is the outcome of the transformation. From down here, what I see I won't be able to actually see what's there. I will have to be somebody that could see it, right? So he said the first number of dialogues, the earliest dialogues, were these battles back and forth of, like, these dead ends, and people for the longest time interpreted that as Plato working out his system, right, through Socrates or something like that. But actually, Gonzalez says no. He in a certain sense, he's showing that not everyone's going to be able to wake up to it, right, and that he's taking you through these dead ends and all this kind of stuff, I think, showing. And so part of my listening is kind of there of, like, well, okay, so is Alcibiades, is he getting it, right? And, like, what does it take to get it? So one of the things in the beginning is, we talked about, how did Socrates get him to play along, right? Well, by actually playing along, right? Yes. He set it up, right?
Yes, and by beautifying him before his eyes, right? We were talking about that before, about there's a certain that buttering that he does, just enough to appeal to his sense of self-importance, and enough to seduce him into the process that's ultimately going to rob him of his self-importance. Yeah. If he can become the kind of person who can appreciate being robbed of his self-importance, right? So right now there's a strain, and can he become the kind of person that can appreciate the very thing that he's coming to know? Yeah. And if he can't, then he can't ultimately come to know it. But then there's that tension, which ultimately has a threshold in most of these dialogues, and we're going to come to it or not, but that he must become the kind of person that can appreciate the insight that is emerging through this dialogue, the very insight that the dialogue is actually trying to surface, or the very appreciation that the dialogue is trying to surface.
Yeah.
Right. So he has to conform himself into the patterning of the dialogue in order to actually understand where it's meant to lead him.
Yes. So yeah, you can feel. I'm glad you said that, the tension, because I can feel the binding. I can feel it in myself as trying to work it out. There is this kind of tension going on, and there is this sense: will he get it? Is he getting it?
Mm-hmm.
Is he capable of getting it? Right? Will his ego, like, basically? I'm thinking a lot about just the, how do you deal with somebody with like a really gripped, immature ego, right?
Right.
So interesting.
Yeah.
All right. So should I read that last part over again? No, I'm just kidding. So I think we're the first Alcibiades is
we're
at
at 581 at the top. Yeah. Well, Socrates, what kind of self-cultivation do I need to practice? Can you show me the way? What you said really sounded true.
Okay, so right there. So he's asked. It's interesting. That seems different. Well,
provisionally.
Yeah. What kind of self-cultivation?
I mean, he's just been bamboozled.
Totally. Well, he sees it enough to have it be attractive enough to ask him a question about it, right? Who knows if he's ready.
It's either attractive enough or it's bemusing enough, right?
Yeah.
That's the thing.
Yeah.
I mean, I think we've probably both had the feeling of being in dialogue where someone has exposited something that is so complex or incomprehensible, or something to which we have no obvious response.
Yeah.
Right. Like when you push someone to the point where their ability to respond coherently, because maybe you've overwhelmed them with encyclopedia, or because you've somehow presented a complex argument that the person hasn't fully absorbed yet. How does a person respond to being so bamboozled in that way, right? That's a decisive moment in any given dialogue. Because all you can do at that point, I think, if you're a genuine interlocutor, all you can do at that point is to say, well, what you say sounds true provisionally. I don't know. I don't fully understand it yet. Say more, right? Because now all of a sudden you've created an object for my aspiration. You've created something that exceeds me. If I can speak into volumes that exceed me,
right,
then there's something seductive about that, right? If I have any sense of ambition, and the attitude of that ambition can be redirected to something that exceeds me, because Socrates has spent this whole time showing Alcibiades that there's actually a great deal that exceeds him.
Yeah.
Right. Trying to draw out his appetite and redirect it to those things. So as a genuine interlocutor, and it seems that Alcibiades is genuine, right, in his willingness to play with Socrates. If he's going to play genuinely, he's going to have to admit at this point that there's no obvious response. There's no obvious way of reducing everything that Socrates has said to any one of his handy or available propositions.
Right.
So what do you say at that point? What do you say? You say, well, I'm stumped and I'm discouraged and I'm going to leave this conversation. And some of Socrates' interlocutors in his other dialogues do just that, right? They go, okay, peace out, Socrates.
Right.
I'm done. I'm done for the day. This is more than I bargained for. Or they're forced to say, well, I might not be in the position to acquiesce to all you've said because I might not understand all that you've said, but I'm pretty overwhelmed by it. So the right thing to do seems to be to cautiously, if precariously, just keep stumbling along and hope that you're going to catch me at some point.
Yeah, absolutely.
The whole idea of Socratic faith now is insinuating itself in, right?
Socratic faith. Is that so? John and Jordan were talking about Socratic faith is the continuity of contact.
The continuity of contact, right?
Is that Socratic faith, or is that something else?
I think it's related to Socratic faith. I don't know if I don't know if that I think the Socratic faith, in the way that John has been talking about, is something like the notion of proleptic rationality. Right. The prolepsis of aspiration that we've been with, that we when we were reading the paper like a few of our sessions ago, right? We were talking about that, right? That Callard's notion of proleptic rationality as the orientation to the orientation to the episteme that is yet unacquired, but that it's yet unacquired and it's beyond you, but it is brought within reach by the mediation of your Socratic daimon. Right? That's right. That Socrates' function is to mediate the relationship between us and what is epistemically unattainable for us at any given time. And so that connection, the continuity of that connection, but the continuity that's mediated by the Socratic symbolon, is that relationship that is continuous only because of the intervention of the Socratic figure, is what I'm understanding to be this kind of Socratic faith that John's talking about.
Right. So interesting as I'm
and
listening.
So then the commitment, the interpersonal commitment to Socrates, the interpersonal commitment to Socrates is the social disposition of, and is the social and symbolic disposition of our commitment to the process that Socrates effects. Right? Which is ultimately the wisdom that comes from graduating perspective away from oneself as we give ourselves over more and more to the carriage of Socratic thinking. Right? As we surrender more into Socrates, we're surrendering ourselves not into a social relationship, though we're surrendering ourselves back into the ontological relationship. Right? That's why Socrates rests at the point where the vertical and the horizontal axes meet.
It's what's interesting is I'm like feeling into this, what we're talking about, right? And then I'm like, okay, it's starting to come into view, but I'm also really aware that it's not into view, yet it's calling to me. Like I'm sitting there going, like I'm listening, I'm like, oh, that's on some level, I would imagine that's something like Socrates guiding us right now. There's something that I'm starting to appreciate in my aspiration to understand it, right? But yet I don't understand what I'm trying to understand, but what I don't understand is calling to me. Okay, interesting, really interesting.
Alcibiades would sympathize, I imagine.
Yes.
I think he's in a very similar position.
Absolutely. Great.
Which is why listening into Socrates, especially in that big long section that you just read bravely, listening into Socrates, right? We're listening in with the ear of Alcibiades, ultimately.
Right. Yeah, I've noticed that. We're
listening. Right? We can feel ourselves being unclasped by everything that Socrates is just describing of him.
Right.
Yeah.
It's interesting to see who Socrates is in our listening. Always. Right, in his listening as he's going along. Interesting.
Yeah.
So I'm at top of 581. Socrates. Let's see. Yes. But let's discuss together how we can become as good as possible. What I said about the need for education applies to me as well as to you. We're in the same condition, except in one respect.
What?
My guardian is better and wiser than Perseus, your guardian.
Who's that, Socrates?
God, Alcibiades. It was a God who prevented me from talking with you before today. I put my faith in him, and I say that your glory will be entirely my doing.
You're teasing me, Socrates.
Maybe, but I'm right in saying that we stand in need of our self-cultivation. Actually, every human being needs self-cultivation, but especially the two of us.
So that detail, which Socrates mentions at the very top of the dialogue, the detail that the same God, that the daimon that entreats Socrates and that spurs Socrates to engage and seduce Alcibiades, that same influence also prevented him from doing so before this exact juncture. I think that's a very, very, very important detail. It's a very important detail, right?
Yeah.
Because the readiness of Alcibiades to be seduced into the dialogic practice is the emergence of that readiness is precisely the affordance for his participation, right? That there is a time in which someone is actually ready to be thrust into his own ignorance and to be dispossessed of himself in the way that Socrates is now dispossessing him. And there had to be a certain participant willingness, at least the potential for it, in order for this to be a fruitful encounter, in order for it to be a fruitful undertaking, right? So I think that's interesting because, we've talked before about how that the Platonic seduction that's on display here, right? That Socrates is using a variety of different socialized means and devices to invite Alcibiades into the process that will ultimately change him, but that there are certain conditions for that practice that even Socrates had to wait for. He had to have a certain amount of forbearance and restraint himself. And I think that's an interesting detail. And so then the intuition of knowing how and when to intervene, the kairos, I guess we could say, intuition for the kairos is something that Socrates is saying he was impressed by from without. Right? He had to know when to intervene. He couldn't just intervene at any juncture. He had to know when to intervene. When to intervene. Right. I think that's a very important detail, not only for the sort of the dramaturgical, situation of the dialogue, but also for the Socratic practice in general. The intervention has to be timed. The intervention has to be attended just so. You're right?
Yeah. That I have to say, like I would say, well, I mean, on some level, like having engaged in a lot of ways Socratic inquiry for since I was in my early 20s, I would say that in the beginning it was so clumsy, right? Precisely because we wouldn't know when to engage with what, right? Like, and I would have to say that that becoming cultivated in the practice and growing wiser in the practice and becoming better at it has a lot to do with the timing, right? Just having your pulse on like when to step in and when to say something, when to not say something, when to like let it all go haywire. It's interesting there, and it's so interesting because it just seems like the only thing that could teach you that is the process of doing it, right? Like you can't give a series of propositions or a set of steps and say go through this, because it seems to be it's not a skill in that sense.
It's an intuition.
It's a capacity, right? It's like a capacity to listen and to feel into it, right? And it does feel more like a body thing. It's like a place that you sit, and then like you couldn't explain. It's hard to explain how you knew that after the fact. You definitely can't do it during the case, because that takes you right out of the looking of it and being into it. It's so interesting that what you just said of like where to intervene, well, I guess that's the case with almost everything, right? Because we're always in a relationship. We always have a life. You could, right? There's always something that you can do to make something worse, or at least not make it worse, but also don't make it better. But that knowing when to bring pressure in and knowing what to pay attention to.
Well, it also right. It's exactly right. It also starts to it also implies that there is a necessary synchronization with the world that has to happen. in this process,
Hmm.
right? This isn't
Yeah.
something you sort of undertake with some kind of autonomous agency.
Yeah.
This is a cooperative synchronization with the world, right? With the
Yeah.
givenness of the world.
Yes.
That it has to be done synchronously with the opportunity that you are presented with.
Right.
You have to work with your givenness,
Mm-hmm.
to help to
Yes.
to again, that plugs back into the metaphor of midwifery, right?
Yeah.
Because you're helping to deliver it, but you have to know just when, just how. You're not as the midwife is not responsible for the pregnancy, right?
Mm-hmm.
The midwife is responsible for ushering it across the threshold properly. So the readiness, the nimbleness, right? You have to the litheness you have to have, the attention you have to have, all of those things, but none of them imply that you're somehow producing this from nothing.
Yes. You're thinking
You're
about
simply
this
helping to guide
yeah.
it. You're simply
Totally.
helping to guide it, right? That the world, the opportunity, right? The opportunity has opened, irrespective of your attention to it. But it's precisely the combination of the opportunity and your attention to it. It's precisely the convergence of your attention to the world and the potential implicit in the world.
Yeah, totally.
And the bond and the binding that is affected by that relational, that relational symbiosis that actually intervenes in this process and helps to midwife it, helps to bring it.
Yeah, there's that midwifing. Yeah, there's definitely that sense of something is being birthed.
That's where it comes in, right? Because Socrates says it's almost as though, again, if we're sort of to extend the metaphor a little bit, Socrates has been waiting cautiously in the wings here, in the margins of Alcibiades' life, at least as he self-reports it, right? Waiting for his opportunity to then come in and help to pronounce the potential that's always been that has always been implicit in the life and times of Alcibiades.
There's also there's a couple of things like so he used the word, so who's that Socrates? God, Alcibiades. It was a god who prevented me from talking to you this day. So the sense of like a god, right? The god prevented him from, or allowed him to make the wise choice of timing, essentially, right? Of the right moment. I just want to make a note of that.
Right. Yes. That right. Because Socrates is deferring his own intuition to that of that third factor we keep talking about, right? Like that sort of that dialogic spirit that is the transpersonal dialogic spirit that then flits between the dialogues and then descends to guide and provoke it. That he continuously defers to that as his that's his tutor, just as he is tutor to Alcibiades.
And it's interesting. He also said here, which is, this struck to me, it's self-cultivation. And he's talking about we both need it, right? He's not like, on one level, he's being way superior to him. He's like knocking him around, right? Like slapping him around, to wake up, basically. But at another level, he's saying we're both dorks. We both need to cultivate here. We're both in the same boat, which is interesting.
Right. Well, which helps to obviate the risk of him becoming the object of an idolatrous worship, right?
Yeah.
Because effectively he's saying it doesn't stop. It doesn't stop here.
Yeah.
It doesn't stop at me. This wisdom, I'm not the terminus of this process.
Yeah. Yeah.
I'm the midwife of the process, right?
Totally.
I'm the bridge for the process. I'm something through which the process travels.
Yes.
I am not the terminus of the process. Don't look at me. Look
Yes.
through me. Look past me.
Yes.
Look
Yes.
over my shoulder.
Look at what
That's where you ought
prevented.
to be looking,
Yes.
right?
Look at what
He's
prevented me to
referring
talk from
back.
talking to you right now. Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Refer beyond me. Refer beyond me.
Yeah.
Right. So he's pulling Alcibiades towards him, but he's also making sure that Alcibiades isn't going to be falling into him, as it
Yeah.
were. Right.
Yeah.
His attention is still going to be beyond him.
So many things happening.
Right. So I may be beyond you, but there is a great deal beyond me. And so right, he's maintaining the tension.
Yeah.
He's positioning him between Alcibiades and the truth.
Huh. Maintaining the tension. Yeah, tension is so interestingly important throughout this.
Mm-hmm.
Like so interesting how tension is building, and like on some level it's almost like I would imagine the cue that Socrates is maybe listening to or feeling, and when he says what and how he says it is very much has to do with where the tension is, right? And where to tighten it, right? Where to open it, right? Like on some level he,
like a good sailor.
Yeah, absolutely. There you go.
Yeah, harnessing the wind.
So let's you want to keep reading?
Yeah.
Okay.
Let's
do it.
I think you're teasing me, Socrates?
Yes. Maybe. But I'm right in saying that we stand in need of self-cultivation. Actually, every human being needs self-cultivation, but especially the two of us.
You're right about me.
And about me.
So there it is, right? There it is again.
Yeah.
So what should we do?
Now there's like then he brings it back with the question. Now where are we? Interesting. What should we
do? Because
do?
there's something about Socrates humbling himself that actually helps to relax Alcibiades a little bit more into the process.
Yeah.
So Socrates, if I can use this very generic theological language, but that Socrates is making sure that he is immanent to Alcibiades as well as being transcendent. And so the tension that we were just talking about, maintaining the tautness of that tension, depends upon him being properly equidistant, figuratively, between Alcibiades and what is beyond Alcibiades. And so, but any time that Socrates retreats too far into the horizon, the project of aspiration is discouraged.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So Socrates has to make sure that he's close enough to Alcibiades for Alcibiades to remain erotically encouraged, if I can use the metaphor of eros there. Right. Alcibiades has to be properly erotically encouraged. Socrates has to be within range of realness. Right? Within range of erotic realness, in order for Alcibiades to continually be, in order for his interest to remain kindled. And so anytime Socrates begins to retreat too far, Socrates brings himself back. And then if we notice, right, Alcibiades relaxes again into the process and seems all the more willing. Yeah.
Wow. Good stuff, man. All right.
Okay. So what should we do?
There must be no giving up, my friend, and no slacking off.
Nope, Socrates, that really wouldn't do.
No, it wouldn't. So let's work it out together. Tell me, we say that we want to be as good as possible, don't we?
Yes.
In what respect? Here comes the questions again. get ready for
at least
all
you get a break from those big checks.
Yes. In what respect?
In what good men do, obviously.
Good at what?
Taking care of things, obviously.
What sorts of things? Horses?
Of course not.
In that case, we'd consult a horse expert.
Yes.
Well, do you mean sailing?
No.
In that case, we'd consult a sailing expert.
Yes.
Well, what sorts of things? Whose business is it?
The leading citizens of Athens.
By leading citizens, do you mean clever men or stupid men?
Clever.
But isn't everybody good at what they're clever at
Yes,
and bad at what they're not?
of course.
And is the shoemaker clever at making shoes?
Certainly.
Then he's good at it.
That's right.
Well, now, isn't the shoemaker stupid at making clothes?
Yes.
So he's bad at that.
Yes.
So the same person is both good and bad, at least by this argument.
Apparently.
Do you mean to say that good men are also bad?
Of course not.
So which ones do you say are good men?
I mean those with the ability to rule the city.
But not, I presume, over horses.
No, of course not.
Over people?
Yes.
When they're sick?
No.
When they're at sea?
No.
When they're harvesting?
No.
When they're doing nothing? Or when they're doing something?
Doing something.
Doing what? Try to make it clear for me.
It's when they're helping each other and dealing with each other, as we do in our urban way of life.
So you mean ruling over men who deal with men,
Yes.
over the boatswains who deal with rowers?
Of course not.
That's the pilot, I'm sorry, that's what the pilot is good at.
Yes.
Do you mean ruling over flute players who direct singers and deal with dancers?
Of course not.
Again, what's the chorus master? Again, that's what the chorus master is good at.
Certainly.
So what do you mean by being able to rule over men who deal with men?
I mean ruling over the men in the city who take part in citizenship and who make a mutual contribution.
Well, what skill is this? Suppose I asked you the same thing again. What skill makes men understand how to rule over men who take part in sailing?
The pilots.
And what knowledge did we say enables them to rule over those who take part in singing?
The chorus masters, as you just said.
Well now, what do you call the knowledge that enables you to rule over those who take part in citizenship?
I call it the knowledge of good advice, Socrates.
But then, do you think the pilot's advice is bad advice?
Of course not.
Then is it good advice?
I should think so. He has to ensure the safety of his passengers.
You're right. Well then, what's the purpose of this good advice you're talking about?
The safety and better management of the city.
But what is present or absent when the city is safe and better managed? If, for example, you asked me, what is present or absent in the body when it is safe and better managed? I'd reply, health is present and disease is absent. Wouldn't you agree?
Yes.
And if you... Just noticing every time he says, and if he begins the question with, and if, I'm like, I've been trained well so far to laugh. And if you asked me again, what is present in our eyes when they are better cared for? I'd say the same sort of thing. Sight is present and blindness is absent. Again, with our ears, deafness is absent and hearing is present when they're in better condition and getting better treatment.
You're right.
Well then, what about a city? What is it that presents or present or absent when it is in a better condition and getting better management and treatment?
The way I look at it, Socrates, mutual friendship will be present and hatred and insurrection will be absent.
When you say friendship, do you mean agreement or disagreement?
Agreement.
What skill is it that makes cities agree about numbers?
Arithmetic.
What about private citizens? Isn't it the same skill?
Yes.
And doesn't it also make each person agree with himself?
Yes.
And what skill is it that makes each of us agree with himself and about whether a hand's width is larger than an arm's length? It's measuring, isn't it?
Of course.
Doesn't it make both cities and private citizens agree?
Yes.
And isn't it the same with weighing?
It is.
Well, this agreement you're talking about, what is it? What's it about? What skill provides it? Does the same skill make both a city and a private citizen agree, both with themselves and with others?
That does seem quite likely.
What is it then? Don't give up. Try your best to tell me. Okay, so right there. So it's like, okay, something he's doing. So again, I'm having this sense of like he's presencing something by making it profoundly like its absence or it's being known. And he has it build up and linger there. This.
Yeah.
It's like I'm sitting here just thinking, well, what is that thing? Like,
yeah. There's a hollow.
Right?
There's a hollow at the center of this discussion.
Yeah.
We're trying to circle our way into the hollow.
Totally. So it's like,
I don't mean circle in your technical sense, or maybe, right. I don't know. You tell me.
I think, you don't know how correct you are, I think. But tell me, if you did know you were correct, how would you know? I'm just kidding. So that's important too. So, because he could just say, he just could give a statement, a proposition that would just give the end conclusion. But he's walking around a hollow, right? And the more he circles around it, the more the presence of what you don't know is starting to become present. This kind of sense of like, well, what you don't know is actually pregnant with presence.
That's right. Yeah. And then ironically, or I should say, not ironically, I should say, even though there's irony involved, but I should say paradoxically, as they enclose it more and more and more, it deepens and deepens and deepens, right? So the hollow appears to grow in volume as they seem to get close, as they seem to encroach on it. Yeah,
totally. So that just, so that seems to, okay. So if we're Socrates, what does Socrates understand, or what is it that he's in a relationship such that it occurs for him not just to say it, right? Like there's a right relationship to it such that he's attuning into something, right? Like I think it's like the good or whatever it is. There's a virtue in this, right? Because it's
right. I think in some sense the virtue in it is the intimacy between he and Alcibiades, because it's as though Socrates dwells somewhere at the circumference of that hollow we keep talking about. And as Alcibiades advances into it, he and Socrates become more intimate, which is to say, he becomes more intimate with sort of the diaphanous nature of that hollow, right? He closes in on it. As he closes in on it, it opens more and more.
Right.
But so too does his relationship with Socrates open more and more, because Socrates is because that hollow, if I could keep referring to it in that way,
Huh.
it's something that he's identifying through Socrates. So as he advances on it, he's also advancing on Socrates, but both are becoming more voluminous as
Yeah.
he advances closer. But if we think about the virtue of that advancement in terms of the social intimacy of the two interlocutors, it makes
Yes.
sense, right? Because as they come closer and closer, Alcibiades' proximity to his ignorance in that hollow
Yeah.
begins to grow more and more and more. So what seems to guide the conversation is it's like the telos of the conversation is the relationship between Socrates and Alcibiades. But of course, the relationship between Socrates and Alcibiades is also opening them to so much more.
Yeah.
So in some sense, to me, what's guiding Socrates is precisely his intimacy with Alcibiades.
Yeah. So it's interesting because so now he's attuned into the relationship, right, that they're both having. And it's funny because just not that long ago, he started saying we're both in the same boat, basically.
Right.
Like
Again, because he's maintaining the equidistance. Yeah.
Right. And then Alcibiades had the first we question. Well, how do we do it? Like we're both on the same team now all of a sudden, right? And so so there's this way in which the listening, they're both walking together a lot more, right? And that togetherness now has its own horizon that is now starting to, you can feel Socrates starting to abide to it and it guiding his questions. And because I do have this sense of Socrates is actually, there's a vulnerability it's probably not easy to appreciate with Socrates in this, but there is a way in which Socrates is vulnerable in all this.
I think so.
Right?
I think so. Yeah, absolutely. I don't think this would work otherwise.
Totally.
It's because you can't be, is this true? Even as I find myself wanting to say it, there can't be, at least in the sense in which, okay, so I don't know if this is true, but I'm going to say it anyway. Let's see. It's as though there can't be a proper seduction without vulnerability on the part of the seducer, or at least not a sustainable, long-term, renewable form of seduction without vulnerability on the part of the seducer.
Right.
I don't know if that's true, but it occurs to me it might be true.
Let's walk along with it a little bit. So it's like, that seems like it has to be true, right? Otherwise it's not a seduction. It's like more like a rape, or it's like something else.
Okay. Right.
Like there's a sense in which I think the vulnerability isn't one in which where Alcibiades is clearly vulnerable, right? Like, because he doesn't know he's taken on this ride, and Socrates clearly has the deft hand in this.
He's been revealed to be destitute and poor and ugly and all the things that he thought he wasn't, because there's always someone more handsome and more rich. So he's now in this position of extreme vulnerability.
Socrates has got to care about him. He couldn't be attuned and adjust accordingly. He could, in fact, Socrates is explicit. He's like, he thinks he's a dork. Right? He thinks he's just foolish and says so. But there's in him, he's only able to say that, right? Because he's revealing a witnessing of him on such a level that he's able to say that in a way that doesn't just offend him, but makes him, I think there's something about like the first one to really care in all this is Socrates. Like this is inside of, I think that's part of where Socrates is vulnerable, is like that he's got it. Like, for example, the timing, right? There is a sense in which if you've done any acting or you've done any teamwork or any kind of performance or anything, timing is the whole thing, right? That's how it flows. And there is this sense where it's this weird place of like where if you get the timing off, the whole thing just goes, right? So you have to actually, you are in this place of just, I think that's the other way that Socrates is kind of vulnerable, is like he's got to be just constantly like this. he doesn't look like he's off balance. In fact, it looks like Alcibiades is off balance.
Mm-hmm.
But Socrates is very much on a razor's edge with this. And he even says so in the sense of like, thank God the gods are here. Like that I didn't step in too early or just the right time. There's this element about timing too for Socrates is vulnerable as well in different ways.
Mm-hmm. Right. Okay. Shall we keep going?
Yeah, let's keep going, and then I have to jump on another call at 4, so just like a couple more minutes.
Okay, sounds good. Okay, where did we leave it?
Let's see here. Well, I'll start up here. Well, this agreement you're talking about, what is that it? Hang on. Let's just start from the top of 584. So,
okay,
of course,
of course.
Doesn't it make both cities and private? Doesn't it make both cities and private citizens agree?
Yes.
And isn't it the same with weighing?
It is.
Well, this agreement you're talking about, what is it? What's it about? What skill provides it? Doesn't the same skill make both a city and a private citizen agree, both with themselves and with others?
That does seem quite likely.
What is it then? Don't give up. Interesting. Yeah, don't give up.
Right.
Try your best to tell me.
Right.
So right there, he's really with them.
Yeah.
Like I can just feel it's like, don't give up. He's like revealing how much he's caring, right?
Yeah.
Stay with me here. Right.
Yeah. And it's because
the investment.
And it's yes. And the only reason that Alcibiades should heed the direction is because of the relationship that they formed.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right. If someone says, trust me, don't give up. If you have no relationship with that person, you're like the encouragement means nothing.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Unless it comes from character, unless it comes from trustworthy character. So that's why the socialized relationship between the two of them is so integral here. It's the binding. It's the adhesive that keeps him trained into the process.
Yeah. So there's also a thing, like, I think what you said too, it's like, unless maybe there was character, right? Like that you could admire, that you can entrust. So in some way, we're also kind of, if we look at Socrates here, has something to do with the way he's being in the dialogue is very, very much the function of what character represents to us.
Right.
Right. The unfolding of character.
Right. Because then the Socratic faith depends. Socratic faith is characterological, right? Yes. Socratic faith depends upon interpersonal.
Yeah.
Socratic faith depends upon the interpersonal trust, the relational trust.
Right.
Right. That is built by and into character.
Yes.
Right. The character of faith.
That character word. There's something about that character.
Well, we keep coming back to it, right?
Yeah.
We keep coming back to it for a while. Yeah, there is something there. That's in some ways that is the most punctuating answer to the question, why dialogues? Why dialogues? Because character. Because character. I think that's the best. That's like the pithiest answer I can come up with, at least, to the question. But when someone goes, why are they dialogues? They're dialogues because character.
Yes.
Because without character, it doesn't matter.
Right.
Without character, it's not relevant. Without character, it's not concern. Without character, it's not interest.
It's interesting.
Without character, it's not ultimate. Anyway, yeah.
I know exactly what you mean when you say character, but like if you actually asked me what it is, it kind of feels like that. It kind of feels like that nullity,
it's in the hollow.
It's in the hollow. There's something about it that's like I've just noticed that like we keep coming back to character. You and I keep talking about it. I even use it a lot, but I don't even know exactly what it is exactly. It's mysterious, but it's important.
Yeah. We'll keep it implicit for now. At some point, maybe we'll want to interrogate it more.
Yes. Spoken like a true Socrates. Let's keep it
I should be
implicit
so
for now.
lucky.
Yes. All right, my friend.
Okay, we'll leave it here.
Yes, this was a lot of fun.
Sure was.
Yeah.
Always is.
All right, my
I've
friend.
come to look forward to it.
Yeah, me too. Much love.
Okay.
Bye.
Enjoy the rest of the day.